Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank both of you for very thoughtful and insightful testimony. Talking about some of the issues that we've already touched upon, in 1962, as you've testified, our defense was something like 8 or 9% of GDP. Today, it's under 3%. The projection I just saw was 2.7 for 2024. The cornerstone of our national security policy is deterrence. I would argue that this dramatic decline by 2/3 is a chink in the armor of deterrence. Would you concur? In other words, the Chinese and the Russians and others look at that number as part of measuring how fearful they should be of our ability to respond.
I think it's certainly unhelpful, Senator, and I think that whether it's the number they look at or the speed at which the U.S. would exhaust its munitions inventory in a particular conflict, those are precisely the sort of issues that would worry me about whether deterrence was eroding.
Second question along those lines is our failure to continue to support Ukraine. How would that affect Xi's calculus in terms of Taiwan and his analysis of our staying power?
I think she is predisposed to think that the United States and its allies lack the endurance and the stamina to hold the line against China and its partners over the long term. And so if the United States were to terminate support for Ukraine or were to allow Ukraine to be defeated, I think it would simply reinforce that perception, which would be unhelpful, as Dr. Shari pointed out, not just in Europe, but in the Asia-Pacific as well.
Dr. Shari, you agree?
Absolutely. I mean, she already believes that America's in decline, that we don't have staying power, and it would certainly reinforce that assumption that even in the event of a conflict, if the United States were to be directly engaged in defending Taiwan, that we simply wouldn't be able to go the distance and China could outlast us.
And my impression from the initiation of the Ukraine war was that Xi was somewhat surprised by the reaction of the West, the unification, expansion of NATO, and that surprise and concern would be dissipated if we indeed abandon Ukraine.
Right, precisely.
I like it when witnesses say precisely to my question. I want to go back to the very beginning, and also I want to associate myself with the questions of Senator Wicker in terms of the GDP percentage. I think the American public doesn't realize, we hear this big number, 800 billion, and at 10 times other countries, but in terms of the percentage of our economy devoted to defense, it's fallen by almost 2/3 in the last 60 years. R&D, real problem. New technologies win wars. Genghis Khan conquered the world because of the invention of the metal stirrup. The longbow turned the tide. The British had 5,000 at the Battle of Agincourt, the French 20,000. The use of the longbow is generally considered by historians to be crucial in turning that battle and indeed the 100 Years' War. I worry, it's obvious that there are new technologies that we've been slow. Directed energy and hypersonics are the two that strike me as most obvious. How do we get the Pentagon to understand the role of new technology? Dr. Scher, what's your view?
I think that the Defense Department, baked into its DNA, understands the value of technology. I actually think what's missing right now is a sense of where the priorities ought to lie, because I think the DoD is still stuck in a mindset from the 1960s where DoD believes that it has to invent all the technologies itself. But there's so much technological innovation happening outside the Defense Department that I think that that's going to matter more. And I would say that it's true that technology is absolutely critical to winning wars, but what matters most is finding the best ways of using the technology.
Right.
That's clear looking at history. And so having institutional processes that can figure out how do we capitalize on this? Because in many ways, I think it is a very...
We've had testimony to this committee that smaller companies in Silicon Valley don't even bother applying for contracts to the Department of Defense because it's so cumbersome, slow, and we're losing access to innovation.
I would actually say even worse, we're building barriers to access, right? Those barriers are self-constructed by us, red tape that makes it hard for companies that would like to work with DoD to work with us. And so we need to find ways to tear down those
In the
barriers.
meantime, we're spending $5 million a missile to knock down $200,000 or $300,000 drones out of the Houthis when directed energy could do it for about 50 cents a shot. We just got to break down this barrier, both in terms of working with smaller and innovative companies, but also, as you say, taking advantage of technologies developed in the private sector and then transferring them into our arsenal, if you will. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I yield.